We place these on the Global Reentry playlist of NPCA's YouTube channel. So it's helpful for people to just be able to go back and look at a later time and such. So, so great. My name is Jody Hammer, and I am the Career Services Specialist for the Global Reentry Program here at NPCA, the National Peace Corps Association. So in my role, I have the pleasure of being able to work with evacuees and RPCVs on different career topics, like including the one that we're going to be talking about tonight. I am also an RPCV, having served in Ecuador from 1994 through 97. And before this job, I worked at headquarters, actually running their career center for RPCVs for 12 years. So I've been able to work a great deal with the RPCV population, and you really are my passion area. I am apologetic tonight for having a blank screen here. For some reason, my camera does not like me right now, so I will on occasion try to make it make it show, and it probably will just go plain black and then perhaps to my profile pic, but at this point it doesn't even want to show my profile pic, so I apologize for that. I am a real person behind this blank screen here. So tonight we're going to talk about a really important topic, the School of Hard Knocks, as I've called it. So it's career lessons learned from failure, and I think this is a really important topic for RPCVs. And everyone, if you could please just put yourself on mute until, yeah, please leave yourself on mute just so that we don't get the background noise. I just was getting a little bit of background noise there, and I'm not sure what it was from. But failure is a really important lesson, and it's something that really does happen to all of us, right? But most people have been led to believe or are under the belief that failure is bad, and oh, you want to sweep that under the rug, you want to hide that, you don't want to talk about that. If you failed, they won't hire you, and so I really want to work a little bit on that perception here tonight, and talk about some examples of failure in the job search process, and in life in general, and just share some guidance, some tips that I have on maybe how you might kind of reframe. So let's go ahead and we're going to get started here. I think most of you have probably already heard us talk about our 4 pillars that we have within the Global Reentry Program, so I'll make this really brief. I focus mostly on the career services area, but there are some other pillars, including the education one, which connects RPCVs with opportunities, financial assistance, different schools will collaborate with us and do things. And then there's the 3rd pillar, the well-being, which is a really important one as well. And actually this Thursday, I believe it is the 30th, yes, Dr. Rhonda Anstead is going to be doing a session on wellness and wellness in the job search, or it's something like that. It's on our calendar. If you go to peacecorpsconnect.org/events, you'll see that, and all of our other happenings. We've actually just added all of our August events, so those will show there as well for you. And then finally, the continued service pillar, which is really, looking at ways to stay involved, to help people, keep being of service here in the States or elsewhere. So, so let's go ahead and really dive in. And my goal here tonight is really to distill the myth that failure's bad. And there's so many great quotes out there on failure, and yet I think a lot of people just don't take them in. And so I hope that tonight you're coming with an open heart and open mind to really think about failure in this different way, and how it really can help you in many ways with your job search and with life in general. So I love the, never let success get to your head, never let failure get to your heart, because to me that really speaks of the be humble, and yet, don't be deflated by failure. Take it as that lesson and get up and learn from it and go forth and, reach that eventual success. And then the difference between an average person, and an achieving person is their perception and response to failure. And I really like that, because that's what it's really all about, right? How do we look at failure? And so I want to spend some time tonight on doing that and really digging in. So breaking the silence. So sharing failure, when you're thinking about sharing failure, whether it's in the course of an interview, or talking to somebody you've met not that long ago, whatever, we don't usually wear failure on our sleeve, right? We're not going to be, or we shouldn't wear it on our sleeve, because if you're doing that, then it's probably that, oh, everything's terrible, I'm a failure, I'm and that's not good either. But as an example of sharing a failure, I'm going to put myself here up as a case example. And I'm here to tell you that failure has been a part of my own life, and it is of everyone's. And I've learned really some of the best lessons about myself, and about what I want and don't want from failure. And I'm going to share with you a failure that I experienced in a work environment. Before I went to Peace Corps, I was living. So just forgive me as I give you this little story here. Before I went to Peace Corps in the early 90s, I was living in San Francisco. I had gone out there immediately after undergrad. I'm from the Midwest, Iowa, and took a job actually with an amazing company, Principal Financial Group. I really liked the company, and I liked what they stood for, and they were a very, very good company. But I took a job as a group and pension representative. So I was working with brokers, insurance brokers. In those days, we sold insurance as well as the 401ks. I did more of the retirement 401k plans, and then enrolled. My background was training and development. And so I fell in love with the people. I was working in the career center, and they had come, and we were chatting and whatever, and they said, you should really interview for this, because you really remind us of our regional manager who's out in San Francisco, and da 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 da. And I thought, well, why not? I mean, I might as well interview. It's not like you're going to get it really necessarily, right? But an interview is always good practice. And lo and behold, I was offered it, and I did decide to take it. It was great in many, many ways. It was an excellent salary. I had a company car that I could use for personal business. I was living in San Francisco, hello, commuting across the Golden Gate Bridge every day to Marin County, reverse commute, right? And it was wonderful in many different ways. But within a couple years, I started to kind of feel, I wasn't feeling drawn to it, but I loved the people that I worked with were amazing. And I think that's what kept me there as long as I was there 3.5, whatever years. And it was because of the people. But I was just starting to kind of listen more to my heart. And I went on a trip to Thailand, and ended up visiting through people who knew people, somebody who I didn't know beforehand, but they were in Peace Corps, and stumbled across, in their Worldview magazine, a reference to, the Masters International program, which existed at that time. And it was just one of those experiences like, oh my gosh, this is meant to be. And I felt this calling, and I always wanted to do Peace Corps at some point, but it just seemed right. And so I applied. Long story short, I moved to DC for my MI program, my Master's International program, before going to Peace Corps. Left on very good terms with my company, and went to Peace Corps. Had a wonderful experience, finished my 2 years, and I got this call or whatever from them saying, hey, we're looking for an international marketing consultant, and you fit the bill. It's based in Iowa, which is where my family was, right? I'd been gone for, a couple years. And you'd be traveling to Chile, Argentina, Mexico, and Spain. So, wow, what doesn't sound great about that, right? More travel, use my Spanish, like, great. But I had already decided I was going to extend. So it was very easy for me to say, I'm sorry, good luck, I'm extending as a leader position, national volunteer coordinator position. Lo and behold, another year goes by, and they reach out again and say, we haven't found the person. We need somebody who has Spanish as well as the product. You'd be perfect. And I think I was like, what do I want to say? It's nice to be wanted, right? And it's nice to have that decision made for you, in a sense, like to not have to come home and think about what's next, what am I going to do, where am I going to be, how long am I going to be on the couch of my friend or my whatever. And so I kind of convinced myself that this was a good move, because I'd be able to reconnect with my family, my nieces and nephews. I'd been gone for 3 years. Des Moines, like a big city, and I'd be traveling Chile, Argentina, Mexico, Spain. Like, I totally worked myself into it and into a frenzy of, okay, this is great, this is going to work. and accepted it. And I told them right up front that I could only give them a year. I really was drawn more to the nonprofit or whatever, and they were fine with that. And I came, and very shortly, I began to feel in my heart like this was not the right fit. It was not my passion area, but not only that, it was not my strength. I mean, yes, I was a Spanish speaker then, and I spoke Spanish pretty well, learning it in the campo, right? But I had no interest in learning or no idea what the word for an annuity was, much less the fact that the international division, when you're dealing with the wealthy people in the country, these other countries, generally they're trying to protect their wealth from others. It's not the share with everyone, let's help those in most need. So it was very, I just felt it really, it wasn't a right fit. And so I knew that, and I wasn't able to give it my all. And I made the really difficult decision of leaving and breaking my 1 year, commitment, because I just couldn't do it. And it was affecting me emotionally. It was, physically, emotionally, I couldn't do it. And I felt really, really bad after I left that job. I remember I went home and I stayed with my parents, and I felt, I mean, I was really down in the dumps because I really felt like I'd let them down. It was all about like, oh, I'm a failure. I let them down. I let myself down. Why, just terrible. And fortunately, I eventually reframed that and came to, realize, I was not living in line with my passion area. And in my case, that's really important to me, to be doing something that I'm feeling is helping society or people in general, and that kind of thing. And so I started working part-time at a hospital doing translations, Spanish translations for the immigrant populations that mostly were working oftentimes in the meat processing plants, and their hands would just be gnarled. And like I started to work there, and just that lit me up. And it really showed me my path, that, this is what I need to do, something like this. And so I went on and got a job out here in DC as, the trainer for one of the AmeriCorps programs. And it was a service, program, and really got back on track. And so it worked out very well. But at the time, I felt like it was such a failure. And at this point, I can now own and acknowledge that, you know what, I did let them down. I left before the year, but I needed to be true to myself, and I failed. It wasn't my, my area, but I learned so much from it, and what's not right for me as much as what's right for me, career wise. And it's just been instrumental in my career ever since, that whole listening to my heart. So enough on that, but I just wanted to kind of share an example. And I have a feeling that many of you, you probably have that kind of a story in some way. And I urge you to spend a little more time on that and thinking about, like, what did you learn from that? How did it work out? How did things, what happened as a result of that failure? And there's a lot of good things that can come from it too. And so 10 lessons from failure right here. I just want to go through quickly. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end also for questions and such. And please drop your questions in the Q&A as you have them. And then we can, periodically stop and take a few of those as well, or do more of it at the end, of course. But failing, it definitely builds character, right? I mean, and I think any RPCV, right, any Peace Corps volunteer knows we all fail in country, in service as well, and that's what we learn from, right? But it oftentimes creates, those opportunities and that opportunity for growth and for learning and for additional, other things that you never would have explored if that had worked out, right? And then failure is it's a great teacher. Like I was saying, the lessons that you learn from failure are huge. And if you learn from it, and that's the key, you really do need to learn from it, so that you can go on and not just repeat the same mistake over and over again, right? It also instills courage. It takes courage to start, right? Some people are so afraid of failure that they won't even start taking those steps. They won't try anything because they're afraid they're going to failure. They'll fail. Oh, I'm going to fall. Oh, I can't ice skate. I've never ice skated. I'm not, whatever it is. And so they never get that courage to like go forth and just do it and learn from it and get better and better. It teaches perseverance, that whole, going on. And, I don't know how long you've been in the job search process, but I know I talk, on a very frequent basis with RPCVs who are, they're discouraged. They've been in the job search process for X period of time, or, and they feel like it's just been such a long time and nothing's coming and nothing's, coming together. And we'll talk about that more in a little bit on lessons from that and what you can maybe do if you are not getting any responses and you're doing the job search, but you're really not moving forward to, for example, the interview stage, that kind of thing. So we'll talk about that more. But it also spawns creativity. A lot of people really find in failure, they find this reserve of, creativity, and maybe your approach changes and you become more creative in how you approach something. So that can be great as well. I've kind of already talked about this next one, requires motivation. It's that courage and motivation to get up and start again, to get up and start again. You fail, you get up, you start again. And so it's just that moving forward, right? And little by little, and you're learning from those mistakes and those failures. The big one that I really want you to walk away from today knowing is that failure is perfectly acceptable. Failure is a normal state of, or not state of being, but it's a normal occurrence in a person's life, right? Just like success. So failure, success, happiness, sadness, right? All of those things are part of life, and it's totally acceptable to have failed. So don't feel like you have to make up or not, like, hide or sweep under the rug. If you're in an interview and they ask about failure, you wouldn't want to say, oh, I've never failed, right? I mean, that would not be a good response, right? That's not what they're looking for. They're looking for you to, give an example, share what you learned from it, and move on, which we'll go through in a little bit as well. Failure can encourage exploration. So encouraging you to, look at things and look at what else might be out there. If you failed in one area, okay, let's think about some other ones. Maybe there's another area that I'm more appropriate for or better suited for, that kind of thing. And then teaches resilience, which goes, back to when we talk about, building character and resilience and that whole perseverance, all of that. So failure is actually, like I say, one of the best lessons out there, and every failure is a step, closer to success, which I know sometimes people are like, oh, don't tell me that. I'm in this, I feel like it's never going to end. But you really have to hold on to that positive attitude and know that, you are going to be moving forward as well. Let's talk a little bit about lessons from failed applications. So I've just put here a little picture of, the black hole, or one of the many pictures that are out there, right? But what I talk about with, like, failed applications, and what I mean by that is when you're putting in an application or you're submitting a resume or cover letter, whatever, and you're just not hearing back, right? And I like to refer to that as, it's kind of like the black holes, what you feel like, right? It's like you're putting all this energy and time and resumes and resources in to what appears to be a black hole where there's just nobody responding. And that's really disheartening. And I get that. I totally get that. And what I usually talk to people about when that's the case, I tell them in part, it's a numbers game, like, and you're going to put out, but that said, you don't want to put out so many applications that you're not able to tailor them, so that then you're just putting out generic ones, because that could be the reason you're not moving forward to that to be interviewed stage, right? Your resume is a very important document. On average, they're going to spend between, 7 to maybe 15 seconds max on the resume, looking at and trying to make, a decision on whether or not they want to bring you in for an interview. So it's very important, right? So when you're not getting any response, I think my first suggestion is oftentimes, look at your application and maybe rework your materials. Maybe approach your resume from a different perspective, or redo it, because sometimes people are using more of a general one, right? Make sure you're tailoring to that job, specifically to that job. And the next job that you go to, you don't have to start with ground zero, but you choose the resume that's the most similar to the job that you're going for this time, and then you tailor it from there and make it very, very unique to that job and really reflective of, so that when they look at that resume and they see at the top, what I like to call the key qualifications, right? You've got a lot of qualifications, but your key qualifications right at top. They see, those phrases that they're looking for and that you have it. So it's like, wow, he's a great fit or she's a great fit. We need to actually talk to this person, right? So that's one of the biggest things, or two of the biggest things I talk to people about. But I also talk to people about seeking advice from others in the field, right? Maybe you're not tailoring it in the format that this specific industry, or maybe even this specific company likes. So what better way to get that insight and information than talk to the somebody in that field. So, resort to your, either your LinkedIn for getting connections, right? And try to, meet, connect with somebody who works in the field or even in that organization. And be really careful. You don't want to say, hey, I'm trying to get in here. Can you get me a job? You're not going to do that. But you're going to say, I'm exploring opportunities in the whatever field, and I'm extremely interested in, I've seen some in the past in, this particular company, and I'm just curious as to, I'd love the perspective of somebody who works there in terms of, what kind of, what kind of work they're doing, or some tips and advice you might have for an outsider, to this company, for making the best case for myself, things like that, to get some of that inside scoop from them on what really gets them, what they really like, what, that can definitely help. So that's my biggest things with the failed applications, right? When it's not even getting referred on, right? Now, if it's a federal job and it's not getting referred on, that means you're not landing in the best qualified classification, right? So you have to meet the minimum qualifications, right? Otherwise, your resume, it'll be spit out or whatever. You won't even make the qualified. But then they usually only look at, I think it's generally it's somewhat dependent, I think, on the number of applications they're receiving, but it's generally the top 10%. So you want to make sure that you're making that resume and making sure that they see your experience, that it adds up to at least the minimum, if not more, by mentioning it in different, jobs where you were doing the same thing, so that you definitely make it to, and hopefully make it to that best qualified. If you make it to the best qualified, that's when you're forwarded on, and then they decide who they're going to interview from there. So I hope that helps. Federal is a little bit different, so I always try to cover it a little bit. Are there any, Olivia, are there any questions in the chat box yet?
Yes, we have one question from Tina.
Okay.
Tina asks, suggestions on how to talk to our parents and our family about failure.
Okay, I need clarification. Talking about your failure or their failure? Like your family's failure or your failure? I assume it's your failure.
Our failure.
Our failure, okay, yeah. And I'm assuming that maybe there's an issue with they're not acknowledging, or they're not as supportive of you in maybe your time of failure. Tips for talking to families. I would, so much of it depends on the dynamics. I don't know the dynamics of your family, but I would say, having a conversation, with whoever you're most comfortable with, right, in your family. And, if you're talking about a recent failure, or, maybe, it's a failure in some way, some recent failure, or maybe it's a Peace Corps failure, whatever, to say, I've been really reflecting on my experience in da, 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 and my failure at whatever. And I'm learning, or I've really, in thinking about it, I've learned some really valuable lessons, and I'm confident this is going to help me in moving forward, in my whatever, blah, 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 job search or something like that. I mean, I would probably say something like that, but I don't know. Are they yelling at you and like mad because they're saying you're a failure because you don't have a job? Or I have no idea. But that's how I would probably approach it. And of course, keep yourself strong. I mean, even if there are attitudes that are maybe unhealthy, or some negative energy in the house or wherever, making sure that you keep yourself grounded in knowing that, what, failure is normal. and yes, I'm not going to keep doing the same thing and then failing, but if I fail and then I move forward, I'm, each time moving forward. What is it? There's a quote by Michael Jordan, who apparently didn't make it onto his high school basketball team. And his quotes about something like failing, I see failure as I failed and failed until I succeeded, or something like that. Yeah, if somebody wants to drop it in the chat box, but it's a famous quote, and it's again about failure. Same thing with famous author who had her manuscript for the huge series for, what was it? Not the Gremlins. Oh my gosh, why am I blanking? Harry Potter, thank you. Harry Potter. And it was rejected something like, I can't even remember how many times. It was, I think, 20 some times rejected. She finally got somebody who would publish it, and then look what happened with that. Like, amazing. So it's just, it's that whole persevere and keep going. So great. Let's talk a minute about, and please submit your questions to the chat box, and I'll certainly get back to some of those questions as well. Let's talk a little more about lessons from failed interviews. So in this case, you made it, rah, yay, awesome. You made it to the interview, right? Which in and of itself is a victory, right? You've made it to probably the best 3 to 5 people that are applying, which is awesome. So the interview is where they decide more on who they're going to go with, right? So sometimes, lessons from failed interviews, sometimes interviews go great and it's awesome and you get the job and everything's great. And there are some times where they go okay, maybe you don't get the job. And there are some times where they're disastrous. Maybe they asked you questions and you just froze and you didn't know what to say. And so there was all this uncomfortable silence and, who knows? I mean, there's the gamut, right? But with a failed interview in general, I always recommend, as soon as you leave the interview and you're in a spot where you can just kind of like think and just process, just jotting down, I always say, jot down the questions they asked you, because that's always helpful for future interviews, for you to, be more prepared, for those kinds of questions, right? But also a little bit about what you responded. And then, what went wrong? If there was something that really went wrong, write about it, write it down. This is what happened, this, whatever, because then you can go back to that and look at that, and you can look up, okay, how should I have responded to the, whatever failure question, or how should I have responded to, those kind of things. So do that as soon as you can, because the thing is, if you don't do it right away, by the next day, it's gone, a lot of it, out of your mind. Stay positive. Even when you feel the interview didn't go very well, I wouldn't write it off and say, I'm not even going to write a thank you note because I know I'm not going to get it. I would still write it. You never know. You don't know how the other people performed or didn't perform. And also realize that interviewers understand what it's like to interview. They understand it's not the most fun thing to do, right? It's stressful. So I mean, they're not expecting perfection, right? So try to not be so hard on yourself as well, and stay positive. Do that thank you note still. If you really feel like you were exceptionally nervous and it was very obvious and whatever, you could include in your thank you note, something about while my nerves, something, I was, did not perform as well as I normally would, given my nerves or something, whatever. You could acknowledge it, but a lot of times you think it went a lot worse. So I wouldn't probably, unless it was really disastrous and you feel like it was, like very obvious, and that they will expect almost that. And then I always say, once let's say you don't get the job, they go with somebody else, and they, finally they let you know or whatever. And sometimes they don't even do that, which is unfortunate. I wish that companies would just do that as a standard practice. I think it's just professional, but I guess when they have so many people applying and whatever, they don't always. But when you hear that it has been filled, and I've mentioned this in other webinars that I've done, they kind of bleed over. I would strongly encourage you to write a thank you for the rejection letter. And that's as simple as saying something like, thank you for letting me know regarding your selection decision for the, XYZ position. While disappointed to have not been chosen, I wish you the very best with your selected candidate. Should you have future opportunities that arise in the future, please keep me in mind as I remain or whatever. I'm confident my XYZ skills would, be well utilized, something like that. And the reason that that's so good is that what's great is it shows that even in the face of rejection, much like failure, right? You failed to get that job, right? You could see it as failed, rejection, whatever. You had the tenacity and the professionalism to come back and thank them for letting you know, and let them know that, if something arises in the future, please let you know. You never know when that's going to happen, because truth of the matter is, many times their first candidate doesn't become the candidate that's hired. Sometimes that first candidate doesn't clear a background check. Other times, maybe they turn it down or, change their mind for some reason. And let me tell you, when you have somebody who's been so professional and written such a letter, that comes across so, professionally, you're a shoe-in. I mean, if that other person didn't come through. So I just think it can really help you in that regard. So I would strongly encourage doing it. So are there any other questions that have come up, Olivia, that makes sense to answer now before we move on?
Yeah, there's one from Dan that kind of goes along with this for interviews.
Sure.
And asks, if you didn't get a job you interviewed for, is it appropriate to ask for feedback on your interview performance?
Yeah, good. That's great. I think you can absolutely ask for that. Now, I would probably you could incorporate it into the thank you for the rejection letter and say, furthermore, I would welcome any feedback you may have for me on my interview to best prepare or something, whatever, for future opportunities. Just know that sometimes they'll give it to you and sometimes they won't, but there's no harm asking, and I think that's actually really it can be very professional doing that as well. So I absolutely say that's fine. Just don't be upset if they don't, because sometimes they can't, sometimes they're not allowed to because of, their legal department or all kinds of reasons. So, okay, so let's look briefly at lessons from failed projects or work, right? And we I think as RPCVs, we all have those, right? I don't think any of us had every single project go right from the ground up and, never have any experience with a failed project. So I like this quote from Paulo, the one who falls and gets up is stronger than the one who never tried. So don't fear failure, but rather fear not trying. So it's that getting up after it, learning from it, and going on. So the tips that I have over here on the right, first, take accountability and ownership, or take ownership and accept responsibility. If you messed up at work, right? Or in a project, like take the ownership and apologize. If it was your fault that something happened, apologize, own up to it. That's huge. A lot of people try to sweep things under the rug, or they blame, and you don't want to blame or deflect to others, trying to look better yourself, because that's not gonna work in the long run. You want to come across, like, when you're interviewing, the last thing you want to do is blame other people, like, for something that went wrong. You want to own it, and then here's what I learned from the process, and this is what, whatever, and I'm ready to, move forward in that area, blah, blah, whatever. So kind of, sharing what you learned, and also asking for assistance if you need it. A lot of times people experience failure because they are not willing to ask. They think it's not okay to ask for, assistance. And so they end up failing. And then, when you own it and you ask, hey, I could really use, if I could get some training on XYZ, whatever, this program, I'm confident I'd be able to better manage the project, whatever it is. So ask for what you need to get better and move forward. I think that's always very important. And you don't, like, when they ask you in an interview, like, tell me about a failed project of yours. You don't want to, in my normal interviewing workshop, I talk a lot about prefacing. So before you go into the exact example, you want to preface it to kind of set the context, right? For example, if they said, tell us about your project management skills, certainly I have 3 years of direct experience in project management. Most recently, in my role as I supervised, and then you go into the example, right? So that prefaces that I have 3 years of, right? when it's a negative preface, you don't want, if it's like, tell me about a failure of yours, you wouldn't want to come back with, oh, can I ever? I have failed again and again. Like you don't want to like have it be just that you're a failure completely, right? But you want to, take ownership and, talk about one example to say, and you might even preface that with, I see failure as not only a normal part of the human experience, but also one of the things that we learn the most from. Let me give you an example. When I was in my village in and then you go through and you give the example and what you learned from it and what didn't go well, and then what you learned from that and how you move forward, and hopefully how you attain success in that or a similar area in the future. So does that make sense? I hope. If not, you can certainly ask a question in the chat box. So oops, we are, whoa, sorry, this is not sorry, oh my gosh, this is so sorry. Here we go. Woo, there we go. Here's where we were. That went into a whole nother presentation. How to explain being let go or fired from a job. And what it really comes down to there is, being truthful, right? If you were, let go, right? But focus on what you learned from the experience, right? And then redirect to, how you're, excited to be able to offer this, whatever skill set, and, and redirect it back to the job. You don't want it to get like mired in details and just like stew in that, but you also want to be, honest rather than sweeping it under the table, if that makes sense. Okay. So that's what we have. Now here I have Q&A, and I want to make sure we have about 22 minutes available for Q&A if you have questions. So please put them in the chat box and we'll try to, take as many as we can. Let me
We have
just
a
see.
question from Jeremy.
Okay.
It's easy to say that comparison is the thief of joy and to not compare yourself to others. But how have you most effectively kept from doing so when you see your friends or peers seemingly move forward when you feel stuck?
Okay, I like that first part of that. That was very poetic. The hold on, I want to see if I can. That was from who again?
That was from Jeremy. It's under Dan's question.
Jeremy. Okay, let me see here. Okay, yes. Comparison is a thief of joy. I love that. Yeah, Jeremy, I'm not going to say it's easy to not compare yourself, because that's a natural part of, I think, the human condition as well, right? We compare ourselves, right? We constantly compare ourselves. And this goes back to when we were, young growing up, right? I mean, I think of, being a young girl or, adolescent or whatever, always comparing yourself to, who's skinnier, who's more popular, all of those kinds of things, right? And, that goes forward too, when you're comparing, even your friends and, oh, the house maybe that they just bought, or everyone seems to be buying this, a new house that's, spacious and has, whatever. It's easy to compare ourselves to others, right? I think what I try to remind myself and my clients when I'm talking to them is each experience is unique, right? So each job search is unique. So yes, they may have gotten a job a lot faster and maybe it has all these great benefits, but it's in a different industry that's in a different pattern right now versus maybe the industry that you're most interested in, right? So it's hard. Try not to compare yourself like that it's you, but rather, well, yes, and there are people who are getting jobs in this and that. There are different fields that are more whatever, and even within the same field, you are going to have different people and different opportunities. I don't know if when you're saying you're comparing yourself, are these people that are living in the same city as you and they're applying for the same kinds of jobs and you're comparing yourself to them? Or is it, just looking as a whole at all of those quote unquote successful ones that, oh, they've got a job, and it can be kind of, you're really thrilled for them, but it can be disheartening for you, the one who's still mired in that, trying to get that job, and that's really hard. It's not easy. I think trying not to compare, but also looking at, okay, what they're in this area, I'm looking in this area, and I'm, moving forward at the, pace that I can, the best pace that I can, and looking at what you can do to make a better impact, maybe more of an impact on the jobs that you're applying for, and really tailoring them and that kind of thing, so that you're looking at your own job search, and your own pace as instead of comparing it to everybody else's. That's what I would say. Let's see. Let's see here. Oh, right here. This is the Michael Jordan, quote. Thank you. I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. That was the Michael Jordan, I think, one. Awesome. I can't believe he didn't make his basketball team in high school. That's pretty wild. What was that, Olivia?
There's a question from Hillary.
Great.
He asks, I interviewed for a federal job 2 weeks ago, and I completely forgot to send a thank you note because I got busy. Does that really hurt my chances? I thought the interview went well.
Okay, so I would say from here on out, definitely always do a thank you note, and I would say do it within 24 hours, 48 max, and do the email version. If nothing else, do the email version, because that gets to them immediately, and it shows them that you're interested. Now, I can't say whether it would, I wouldn't say it would necessarily rule you completely out. If I were on the panel, I would probably be like, oh, she didn't do did she do a thank you note to any of you all? I mean, it would be something that I would think about, but it just depends. It depends on the people who are hiring, and how important that is to them, right? It's kind of like the cover letters. Some people read them, some people don't. I always recommend doing one, right? With thank you note, even more importantly, though, I would always recommend from here on out doing one, just to let them know that you remain interested. You appreciated their time they took to visit with you. It's not hard to do the thank you note, but it leaves a really good impression. So now, if you really want to go above and beyond, you could, do that thank you note, the electronic one, and then within a day, send a handwritten one, because who does snail mail anymore? Hardly anybody. But it can really set you apart as, wow, they get the email version right away, and then 3 days later they get this, wow, they also sent this, they really want this job. So I think it can work very well for you. You don't say the same exact thing that you said in the one, you make it more brief, but you're once again just thanking them for taking the time to visit with you regarding, your interest in whatever that position, and that. So awesome. All right, let me just see, are there any other questions? Several people have piped in to answer. Thank you so much, Shannon, and thank you, Dan. That's great. Oh, nice, Dan. I like this. The quote, success is relative. Yeah, I took about a 10-year detour after college. Nice. Awesome. Now you've caught up. See, it all evens out later, right? So you might be envious of them now, and then later, you might be way ahead. So awesome. Yep, that's great. Other questions from the audience? Any to drop in the chat box? We're here and available to answer any of those questions. Oh, Gloria, great. Thank you, letter. Could you add something that you had thought about to add? You're talking probably about the snail mail version. Yes, if you didn't get everything said in the one, you could certainly add to it, so that it's not, you just don't want it to be the exact same wording. So that's a great idea. Thank you, Gloria. Let's see. Nice. Any other questions? I don't know if anyone else is interested in sharing, like if anyone's willing to share an example of just, a failure that you had experienced and how you've learned from it and been able to recraft and move forward. Whether it's, being let go from a job or a failed project or, anything, we could certainly have you just unmute yourself and share, or you could just write it in the chat box, your choice. But I think it's always good, I think, to learn from other people's failures and struggles and all of that as well. And it also helps us to all know that, again, reinforce that we're not alone in this. We are in this, together, and together we shall succeed, together we shall fail, and we'll learn a lot along the way in this great journey we call life. So, sorry?
We have another question from Dan.
Yeah.
How do you feel about talking about the failure of others in interviews? For example, you witnessed a failed development project in your site and what you learned from watching it crash and burn.
Yeah, I think be careful on how you do it. I would say in this situation where you're giving, a failed development project and, what you learned, looking at it and how, you're probably going to be talking about the cultural norms of being this way. And so, the approach that was taken was very, whatever. And I learned so much from that, having, witnessed it. And this is what I've, learned from it and gone ahead. What you wouldn't want to say is, oh, my boss was, and this is what she did, and he, she was this. You don't want to ever really badmouth like a former boss, even if they deserve it. You want to always take that high road and, be that, confident professional, not, talking bad about, anyone. Now, and sometimes this is now getting a little bit off from the question there, but sometimes maybe you had a failure or a, in a project or something that was a group project in college, and there you want to, you might emphasize, you might be talking about that, but you don't want to be like, oh, but the one person wouldn't do any of his work and that's why it all failed, because that just points you out as a blamer, and that's not helpful, and it's not the kind of person that most people want to bring onto a team. So but good question, Dan. Nothing like working for yourself, says Andrew. There you go. That is an advantage, right? I'm going to go up and see if there's any that we've missed here. I think we've got most of them. If there's any final questions, we certainly can take them, and likewise, we can also stop the recording here, and then if there's anyone who wants to stay on the line and ask some more one-on-one questions, or just in a small group, non-recorded environment, we could certainly do that as well if people are interested. Looks like we have some additional comments or questions. Great. Gloria, another question from you. There we go. How about a time gap on your resume that was not productive? How to explain that? Good question. So a time gap where you don't have any employment, or what you were doing you don't feel was valuable. Because if it's the latter, I would probably say you can find value in every job that you've done, right? Even if it's not, you feel like it's not related or whatever, with the transferable skills and those kinds of things, you don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but you could allude to it. On the other hand, if it's a time gap where it's like this open, you don't have anything during that time to show for it, job wise or whatever, I would say be prepared to talk about that in an interview when you get to an interview, because they may well ask if there's a big gap of maybe, a year, 2 years, whatever. They might ask, tell me a little bit about what was going on here, or what, and you could probably explain that fine. But yeah, so just be prepared to talk about it. But I don't think if you don't have anything to put, if you have something that was volunteer during that time, you could list that as the, in your professional experience, because volunteer work can be professional experience, and that could maybe fill that gap if you're trying to, not make that so, obvious. I think those are the biggest things that I would say, Gloria. And then Sarah says, reframing. I usually reframe the question and talk about how I addressed a challenging situation. Is that acceptable? Okay, so reframing like a failed project is what I'm assuming you're saying. You reframe the failed project or whatever in a work environment, and then talk about how I addressed a challenging situation. Yeah, I think that's acceptable if you work it in. I wouldn't try to not say it was a failure if it was a failure. I would own that and say, and that was really challenging, and here's how I dealt with it, and go into what you did and what you learned from it, most importantly. And I consider myself better prepared now, for future opportunities, and I'm excited about this one, and go from there. Okay, so yes, I think that's acceptable, Sarah. Yes, okay, great. All right. So I do not, let's see. Welton shares, failure is a part of life. Everyone fails. What is important is what you learn from it. Absolutely. And Welton, I hope that that's what you're walking away from this, this webinar with is that failure is a normal, a part of life, and everyone does fail. And what's important is how what you learn from it, but how you get up and go thereafter and keep trying, right? Because success really is, it's formed from, or it's achieved from many, many different failures, right? And then they end in that eventual success where you weren't too tired to get up and go forth and persevere and all of that. Great. All right, folks. Well, I would say let's do a last call for any kind of questions on, related to failure, related to, the interview, challenges, that kind of thing. And we'll answer any of the final ones. And if not, we'll wrap it up and stop the recording, and that's okay too. Also, let's see. Yeah, Dan, that's a really good point. As an interviewer, I find it very suspicious when someone cannot identify a time that they failed during an interview. Exactly. It's kind of like when the person says, they're like, well, tell us about a weakness of yours, right? Because that's that related kind of question. A failure might be related to maybe a weakness, something that you still are, weak in, that you're working on, right? And for that question, for the weakness question, you do not want to come back with, oh, I don't have any weaknesses, right? Or do not come back with the like, I don't know, for some time people said, oh, just say you're a perfectionist because that's really a strength, and choose a strength and disguise it as a weakness. And no, you don't want to do that either, because I'll tell you, if I hear that in an interview, oh, I'm just a perfectionist, I'll just do whatever needs to be done and work on weekends and stay all night and da 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 da. I'm just like inside going, like, no, perfectionist, really. So, so really with the weakness one, I want people to choose a weakness, own up to having a weakness, couch it in the past, talk about what you've done to get better and how you've made progress, but you don't want to choose one where, and I'm all better now, I don't, it's not a, it's not a problem. Then they can say, well, tell us about a weakness that is still a problem or still an issue, right? So you want to, you do want to, but why you want to couch it in the past and show how you've been working on it is you want them to know that you're open to working on yourself. You don't see yourself as a perfectionist. You see yourself as somebody who, you value yourself enough to work on yourself. And when there is an issue, you're going to come through it and you're going to continue on. So, so I think that's key as well. It is really important, Gina, yes, to have that faith and, trust after failure. And it's hard because, when you do fail, I mean, our natural tendency, right, is, that kind of like, oh, failure, like it's not, you lose a little bit of that confidence and you got to kind of get back up there and stand up and, or get back in the driver's seat and, try it again, right? But it's hard to do that. And so I think especially in the beginning, people kind of, go in and kind of, they're whatever. And you can acknowledge that you're sad, and that's fine. You don't have to be the peppy like all the time where, certainly you don't get a job, you failed in the interview, whatever, and you didn't get the job. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be, wow, I really wish that had come through. I wanted that job a lot. That's okay, right? But just know that there is something else out for you. And many times you're going to find, once you find that, you're going to be able to see, gosh, if I had gotten that job, my life would have been totally different. I may not have ever met my life partner or whatever, or other things that come with that failure, right? It leads you down this road that, has new opportunities and, amazing things as well. So I always try to keep that in mind as well. So excellent. All right. Well, I think we have, Olivia, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've gotten to all the questions that were in the queue.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and try to stop the recording here, and then we can, if people do want to stick around and they have questions, I'm happy to help them as well. So thanks so much, everyone, for being here tonight. All right. Great.